Chapter 1. From Humble Beginnings to Mafia Ascent. Frank Costello was born Francesco Castiglia on January 26, 1891, in the humble village of Loropoli, nestled in the heart of Italy's Calabria region. The Castiglia family, like many others in the area, eked out a meager existence as farmers, living off the land and the few livestock they could afford to raise. Frank's father, Giovanni, worked tirelessly to provide for his family, but the hardships of rural life were a constant burden. As a young boy, Frank quickly learned the value of hard work and perseverance. He toiled alongside his father in the fields, tending to the crops and livestock, and helped his mother, Assunta, with household chores. Despite the grueling labor, Frank found solace in the simple pleasures of life, such as playing with his siblings and exploring the surrounding countryside. However, Frank's dreams extended far beyond the confines of Loropoli. He yearned for a better life, one filled with opportunity and prosperity. As he grew older, he became increasingly determined to escape the poverty that had plagued his family for generations. In 1906, at the age of 15, Frank made the life-altering decision to immigrate to the United States. He bid farewell to his family and boarded a steamship bound for New York City, the bustling metropolis that promised a brighter future. Upon arrival, Frank was immediately struck by the sheer size and energy of the city. He marveled at the towering skyscrapers, the bustling streets, and the diverse mix of people from all corners of the globe. However, Frank soon discovered that the streets of New York were not paved with gold, as he had once imagined. He found work as a laborer, toiling long hours for meager wages. Despite the hardships, Frank remained undeterred, determined to make a name for himself in this new land. It wasn't long before Frank's sharp intellect and natural charisma caught the attention of local Italian-American crime syndicates. He quickly fell in with a notorious gang led by Giuseppe Joe the Boss Masseria, a powerful and ruthless mobster who ruled over the city's underworld with an iron fist. Under Masseria's tutelage, Frank learned the ins and outs of organized crime, honing his skills in gambling, bootlegging, and extortion. As Frank's reputation grew, so too did his ambition. He quickly climbed the ranks of the Mafia, earning the respect and loyalty of his fellow gangsters. His sharp mind and ruthless tactics made him a formidable force within the criminal underworld, and he soon found himself at the helm of his own burgeoning empire. Frank's criminal enterprise expanded rapidly, encompassing lucrative rackets in gambling, bootlegging, and extortion. He forged alliances with other powerful crime lords, cementing his status as a key player in the city's criminal landscape. His influence extended beyond the underworld as he cultivated relationships with politicians, law enforcement officials, and business leaders. Frank's rise to power was not without its challenges, however. He engaged in bloody turf wars with rival gangs, narrowly escaping assassination attempts on multiple occasions. His involvement in the notorious Castellamarese War of the early 1930s, which saw the downfall of legendary mobster Salvatore Maranzano, cemented Frank's reputation as a cunning and merciless strategist. Despite his criminal activities, Frank maintained a veneer of respectability, cultivating relationships with high-profile politicians and businessmen. He even managed to avoid a lengthy prison sentence for his role in the infamous Kiefover Committee hearings, which sought to expose the inner workings of the Mafia. Frank's reign at the top of the underworld was not to last, however. In the late 1950s, he found himself embroiled in a power struggle with the up-and-coming gangster Carlo Gambino. Gambino, with the backing of other Mafia families, orchestrated Frank's downfall, orchestrating an assassination attempt that left the aging boss severely wounded. Forced into semi-retirement, Frank spent his final years in relative obscurity, his on sea formidable empire crumbling around him. He died in 1973, a shadow of his former self, his legacy as one of the most powerful and influential Mafia bosses in American history forever etched in the annals of organized crime. As Frank Costello's story unfolded, it became clear that his life was a testament to the power of ambition and the allure of the American dream. From his humble beginnings in a small Italian village to his rise as a Mafia kingpin, Frank's journey was marked by determination, cunning, and ruthlessness. Throughout his criminal career, Frank navigated the treacherous waters of the underworld with skill and finesse, using his intelligence and charisma to forge alliances, crush enemies, and expand his empire. He was a master manipulator, expertly playing the game of power and politics to maintain his position at the top. However, Frank's story was also one of hubris and downfall. His relentless pursuit of power and wealth ultimately led to his demise, as he found himself outmaneuvered by a younger, more ruthless adversary. In the end, Frank Costello's life served as a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of unchecked ambition and the fleeting nature of power. Despite his criminal exploits, Frank Costello remains a fascinating and complex figure in American history. His rise to power and eventual downfall offer a unique window into the world of organized crime, revealing the intricate web of corruption, violence, and ambition that defined the Mafia's golden age. In the following chapters, we will delve deeper into Frank Costello's life, exploring the key events, relationships, and decisions that shaped his legacy as one of the most powerful and influential mafia bosses in American history. From his early days as a young immigrant to his rise as the Prime Minister of the underworld, we will trace Frank's journey through the dark underbelly of 20th century New York City, providing a captivating and comprehensive look at the life and times of a true mafia kingpin. Chapter 2. The Prime Minister of the Underworld. Frank Costello's ascent to power within the Mafia was nothing short of meteoric. His sharp intellect and ruthless ambition quickly set him apart from his peers, and he soon found himself at the helm of a vast criminal empire. As the undisputed ruler of New York's underworld, Frank forged strategic alliances with politicians, law enforcement, and other crime lords, expertly manipulating the system to expand his network and maintain his dominance. One of Frank's most notable alliances was with Tammany Hall, the powerful political machine that controlled New York City's Democratic Party. Through his connections with Tammany Hall, Frank was able to exert influence over local elections, ensuring that politicians sympathetic to his interests were elected to office. In return, these politicians turned a blind eye to Frank's criminal activities, allowing him to operate with impunity. Frank's relationship with law enforcement was equally complex. While he was careful to avoid direct confrontations with the police, he was not above using bribery and intimidation to ensure that his operations ran smoothly. Frank maintained a network of informants within the police department who kept him apprised of any investigations that might threaten his interests. He also cultivated friendships with high-ranking officers who could be counted on to look the other way when necessary. Frank's dealings with other crime lords were perhaps the most delicate. He understood that the key to maintaining his power was to keep a careful balance between cooperation and competition. As such, he was always on the lookout for opportunities to expand his territory, but he was also willing to negotiate and compromise when it served his interests. One of Frank's most significant rivalries was with Vincent Mad Dog Call, a notorious Irish-American gangster who controlled the city's lucrative bootlegging rackets. Call was a ruthless and unpredictable adversary who was not afraid to use violence to get what he wanted. Over the years, the two men engaged in a series of bloody turf wars, with each side suffering heavy losses. Despite the danger, Frank remained cool and calculating, always thinking several moves ahead. He knew that the key to defeating Call was to undermine his support within the underworld. To this end, Frank began to court Call's rivals, offering them protection and support in exchange for their loyalty. Slowly but surely, Frank's alliance grew stronger, while Call's weakened. The turning point in the conflict came in 1931, when Call attempted to assassinate Frank outside a Manhattan nightclub. The attack failed, but it left Frank with a deep scar on his cheek, which he would carry for the rest of his life. The failed assassination attempt only served to strengthen Frank's resolve, and he redoubled his efforts to bring Call down. In the end, it was Frank's political connections that proved to be Call's undoing. With the help of his allies in Tammany Hall, Frank was able to persuade the authorities to crack down on Call's operations. Over the next few months, Call's associates were arrested, his liquor shipments were seized, and his speakeasies were raided. Faced with mounting pressure, Call was forced to flee the city, leaving Frank as the undisputed king of New York's underworld. Frank's reign as the Prime Minister of the underworld was marked by unprecedented prosperity and power. He controlled a vast criminal empire that stretched from the streets of New York to the halls of power in Washington, D.C. His influence was such that he could make or break political careers, and his word was law within the underworld. However, Frank's success did not come without its challenges. He was constantly forced to navigate a complex web of alliances, rivalries, and betrayals, always on guard against those who sought to usurp his power. He was also the target of numerous assassination attempts, including a near-fatal shooting in 1957 that left him with a bullet lodged in his skull. Despite these challenges, Frank remained a formidable force within the underworld, maintaining his grip on power until his death in 1973. His legacy as one of the most powerful and influential mafia bosses in American history is still felt to this day, a testament to the enduring allure of the American dream and the dark underbelly of power and ambition that it often conceals. Chapter 3. The Veneer of Respectability. Frank Costello's power and influence extended far beyond the criminal underworld. He was a master of manipulation, using his charm and cunning to cultivate relationships with politicians, law enforcement, and high-profile businessmen. These connections allowed him to maintain a veneer of respectability, even as he continued to expand his criminal empire. One of Frank's most valuable political allies was William O'Dwyer, the mayor of New York City from 1946 to 1950. O'Dwyer was a former judge and district attorney who had earned a reputation as a tough-on-crime reformer. However, he was also a shrewd politician who understood the value of having friends in high places. Frank and O'Dwyer first met in the early 1940s when O'Dwyer was serving as the Brooklyn district attorney. Frank had been indicted on charges of conspiracy to violate gambling laws, and he turned to O'Dwyer for help. The two men struck up a friendship, and O'Dwyer agreed to use his influence to get the charges dropped. Over the next few years, Frank and O'Dwyer grew closer, with Frank providing financial support for O'Dwyer's political campaigns and O'Dwyer using his power to shield Frank from prosecution. When O'Dwyer was elected mayor in 1946, Frank was one of his most vocal supporters. Frank's relationship with O'Dwyer was just one example of his ability to manipulate the political system to his advantage. He also had close ties to several members of the New York State Legislature, as well as to the governor himself. Frank was not afraid to use bribery and intimidation to get what he wanted, and he was known to have a long memory when it came to favors owed. Frank's influence extended to the world of law enforcement as well. He had a network of informants within the police department who kept him apprised of any investigations that might threaten his interests. He also had close relationships with several high-ranking officers who could be counted on to look the other way when necessary. One of Frank's most trusted allies in the police department was Captain Edward Coughlin, the head of the NYPD's Vice Squad. Coughlin was a corrupt officer who was on Frank's payroll, and he was instrumental in helping Frank maintain control over the city's gambling rackets. In exchange for a share of the profits, Coughlin provided Frank with protection and information, allowing him to stay one step ahead of his rivals. Despite his criminal activities, Frank was able to maintain a veneer of respectability by cultivating relationships with high-profile businessmen and celebrities. He was a regular at the city's most exclusive nightclubs and restaurants where he rubbed shoulders with the rich and famous. He was also a generous philanthropist, donating large sums of money to charity and sponsoring local sports teams. One of Frank's most high-profile friends was Frank Sinatra, the legendary singer and actor. Sinatra was a frequent guest at Frank's nightclub, the Copacabana, and the two men became close friends. Frank provided Sinatra with protection and support, helping him to navigate the often treacherous world of show business. In return, Sinatra provided Frank with a level of celebrity and glamour that helped to bolster his image as a respectable businessman. However, Frank's veneer of respectability was not without its cracks. Despite his best efforts to avoid prosecution, he was eventually called to testify before the Kefauver Committee, a U.S. Senate committee investigating organized crime. Frank's testimony was a media sensation, with millions of Americans tuning in to watch him squirm under questioning from the committee's chairman, Senator Estes Kefauver. Frank's performance before the committee was a masterclass in evasion and obfuscation. He refused to answer many of the committee's questions, claiming that he could not remember the details of his criminal activities. He also denied any involvement in organized crime, insisting that he was merely a legitimate businessman who had been unfairly targeted by the authorities. Despite his efforts to downplay his involvement in the underworld, Frank's testimony did little to shore up his image as a respectable businessman. The public was fascinated by the spectacle of a powerful mafia boss being grilled by a U.S. senator, and Frank's reputation as a criminal kingpin was cemented in the public imagination. Frank's legal troubles continued in the years that followed, with several high-profile indictments and trials. However, he was able to avoid serious jail time thanks to his connections and his ability to manipulate the legal system. He continued to run his criminal empire from behind the scenes, using his wealth and influence to maintain his grip on power. As Frank grew older, he began to realize that his days at the top of the underworld were numbered. He knew that there were younger, more ruthless gangsters waiting in the wings, eager to take his place. In 1957, Frank was the target of an assassination attempt, narrowly escaping with his life. The shooting was a wake-up call for Frank, and he began to consider his options for the future. Frank's eventual retirement from the underworld was a carefully orchestrated affair. He handed over control of his criminal empire to his longtime associate Vito Genovese and went into semi-retirement. He spent his remaining years living a quiet, comfortable life in Manhattan, surrounded by his family and friends. Frank Costello's legacy as a mafia boss is a complex and contradictory one. On the one hand, he was a ruthless criminal who built a vast empire through violence, intimidation, and corruption. On the other hand, he was a charming and charismatic figure who was able to maintain a veneer of respectability through his connections and his philanthropy. In the end, Frank Costello's story is a cautionary tale about the dangers of power and ambition. His rise to the top of the underworld was nothing short of meteoric. But his eventual downfall was a reminder that no one is above the law. Despite his best efforts to maintain his grip on power, Frank was ultimately brought down by his own hubris and the relentless pursuit of justice by law enforcement. As Frank's story comes to a close, it is worth reflecting on the lessons that can be learned from his life. While Frank's criminal exploits may be fascinating, they are also a reminder of the dark underbelly of American society, where power and corruption often go hand in hand. By examining Frank's life and legacy, we can gain a deeper understanding of the complex forces that shape our world and work towards building a more just and equitable society for all. Chapter 4. The Fall of a Mafia King. Frank Costello's reign as the Prime Minister of the underworld was a tumultuous one, fraught with danger and betrayal. Despite his best efforts to maintain control, he knew that there were always those waiting in the wings, ready to seize power for themselves. In the late 1950s, Frank found himself embroiled in a power struggle with one such adversary, Carlo Gambino. Gambino was a rising star within the Mafia, a cunning and ruthless gangster who had built a formidable empire of his own. He had long resented Frank's dominance and saw an opportunity to seize power for himself. With the backing of other mafia families, Gambino orchestrated a series of attacks on Frank's interests, seeking to weaken his grip on the underworld. At first, Frank was able to fend off Gambino's advances, using his political connections and his network of informants to stay one step ahead. However, as the attacks grew more brazen and more violent, Frank began to realize that he was in grave danger. He knew that he needed to act quickly if he was to survive. Frank's response was swift and brutal. He ordered a wave of retaliatory strikes against Gambino's associates, targeting their businesses and their families. The streets of New York became a battleground as the two mafia bosses waged a brutal war for control. Despite Frank's best efforts, however, the tide was turning against him. Gambino's forces were better organized and better equipped, and they seemed to be everywhere at once. Frank's own men were growing restless, questioning his leadership and his ability to protect them. The turning point came in May of 1957, when Frank was ambushed outside his apartment building on Central Park West. As he stepped out of a cab, a gunman emerged from the shadows and opened fire, hitting Frank in the head. Miraculously, Frank survived the attack, but the bullet remained lodged in his skull, a constant reminder of the danger he faced. Frank's near-death experience had a profound effect on him. He realized that he could no longer continue to fight the war on his own, and that he needed to find a way to make peace with Gambino. After weeks of negotiations, the two Mafia bosses agreed to a truce, with Frank ceding control of several key rackets to Gambino in exchange for his safety. However, Frank's concessions were not enough to satisfy Gambino's ambition. Over the next few years, Gambino continued to consolidate his power, expanding his criminal empire and solidifying his position as the new Kingpin of the underworld. Frank, meanwhile, was forced into semi-retirement, his once formidable empire crumbling around him. As Frank grew older, he became increasingly isolated and paranoid. He was haunted by the memories of his criminal past and by the knowledge that he had once been one of the most powerful men in the country. He spent his days holed up in his apartment, surrounded by bodyguards and rarely venturing outside. Despite his efforts to remain hidden, Frank's past continued to haunt him. In 1961, he was subpoenaed to testify before a grand jury investigating organized crime. Frank refused to cooperate, invoking his Fifth Amendment right against self-incrimination. The move earned him the nickname the Prime Minister of the Underworld and cemented his reputation as a criminal mastermind. Frank's final years were marked by declining health and increasing isolation. He suffered from a series of strokes, which left him partially paralyzed and unable to speak. He died on February 18, 1973, at the age of 82, surrounded by his family and a few close friends. Frank Costello's legacy as a Mafia boss is a complex and controversial one. On the one hand, he was a ruthless and cunning criminal who built a vast empire through violence, intimidation, and corruption. On the other hand, he was a shrewd and savvy businessman who understood the value of relationships and the importance of maintaining a veneer of respectability. In many ways, Frank Costello's story is emblematic of the American dream, the idea that anyone can rise to the top through hard work, determination, and a little bit of luck. However, it is also a cautionary tale about the dangers of power and ambition and the corrupting influence of money and greed. As we look back on Frank Costello's life and legacy, it is important to remember the lessons that his story teaches us. While the allure of power and wealth may be strong, it is ultimately a hollow and fleeting pursuit. True success comes from building relationships, creating value, and leaving a positive impact on the world. Frank Costello may have been a powerful Mafia boss, but he was also a flawed and tragic figure, a man who sacrificed everything in his quest for power and control. His story serves as a reminder that, in the end, it is not our accomplishments or our wealth that define us, but our character and our values. Frank Costello's rise and fall is a cautionary tale about the dangers of power and corruption. While he may have achieved great wealth and influence, it ultimately came at a tremendous cost. His life is a reminder that true success comes from building relationships, creating value, and leaving a positive impact on the world. As we reflect on Frank Costello's legacy, it is important to consider the lessons that his story teaches us. While the allure of power and wealth may be strong, it is ultimately a hollow and fleeting pursuit. True success comes from living a life of integrity, compassion, and service to others. In the end, Frank Costello's story is a reminder that no matter how powerful or influential we may become, we are all ultimately accountable for our actions. It is up to each of us to choose the path that we will follow and to live a life that is true to our values and our principles. As Frank Costello once said, the only thing that matters is how you play the game. Let us strive to play the game of life with honor, integrity, and a commitment to making the world a better place for all.